You can have a wedding any time, Addie. This is my first baby. That's what my sister said, 6 weeks before I walked down the aisle in a garden full of empty chairs. She said it like she was choosing between brunch spots, like my wedding day was something I could reschedule around her convenience. So she booked her baby shower on the same day, same hour, and one by one, my entire family followed her, my mom, my aunts, my cousins, even my dad, the man who held my hands and promised he'd walk me down the aisle. He chose finger sandwiches at a country club over his own daughter's vows. 7 people showed up to my wedding. 417 messages showed up the moment they realized what they'd missed. Before I go on, if this story hits close to home, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and your local time. My name is Adeline Farrow. I'm 28. And now, let me take you back to 6 months before my wedding, to the Thanksgiving dinner where my father looked my husband in the eye and told him he'd never amount to anything. In the Farrow family, there was one rule nobody said out loud. Everything revolved around my sister, Colette. My father, Richard Farrow, spent 31 years as a branch manager at a regional bank in Hartford. Respectable, steady, the kind of man who wore the same 3 ties on rotation and called that discipline. My mother, Diane, stayed home, hosted book clubs, and made sure the house in Glastonbury always looked the part. White colonial, black shutters, hydrangeas along the walkway. From the outside, we looked like a postcard. From the inside, the math told a different story. Colette married Brett Whitfield 5 years ago. The Whitfields own a commercial real estate company in Fairfield County, or at least they did. At the time, Brett was golden. He bought Colette a Lexus SUV, a Cartier love bracelet, and, more importantly, he bought my parents' loyalty. Brett paid the mortgage on the Glastonbury house. He gave my mother a supplementary credit card. He funded the new kitchen renovation. And in return, the entire Farrow family treated Colette like she'd won the Nobel Prize for achievement. Colette hasn't earned a paycheck in 6 years. She calls herself a socialite and an event planner, though I've never seen evidence of either. But in my family, marrying well is the same as doing well. And then there was me, Adeline, the younger one, the one who freelanced as an illustrator, children's books, editorial art, the kind of work that doesn't come with a corner office or a business card. The one who lived in a rented studio in New Haven with paint-stained countertops and a second-hand couch. I never resented Colette for marrying rich. I resented that it made everyone forget I existed. I met Marcus Delaney at an art fair in New Haven 3 years ago. He was standing in front of one of his own paintings, a large oil piece of a woman reading on a fire escape in Brooklyn, the light catching her hair just right, and he was frowning at it like it owed him money. I laughed. He turned, and something in his eyes, this quiet, focused intensity, made me stop. Marcus is a contemporary realist painter. He works in oil, mostly portraits and urban landscapes, and he has the kind of talent that people in the art world describe as rare, and my family describes as not a real job. He sold pieces through small galleries and took commissions when they came. Some months were good. Some months, we ate a lot of pasta. But we were building something honest, and that mattered to me more than any quarterly bonus. My family never saw it that way. Thanksgiving, 8 months before the wedding, I brought Marcus to the Glastonbury house for dinner. Colette arrived in the Lexus, carrying 2 bottles of Napa Valley Cabernet. $200 a bottle, she made sure to mention. I brought a pie I'd baked from scratch. My mother placed the wine on the dining table with both hands like it was a sacrament. She didn't mention the pie. Over turkey, my father leaned toward Marcus with that particular smile, the one that pretends to be friendly. "So, Marcus," he said, "when are you getting a real job?" Brett chuckled from across the table. Colette tilted her head and said, "At least Adeline has someone, right?" Her voice soaked in pity. Marcus said nothing. He just reached under the table and squeezed my hand. What nobody knew, what I barely knew myself, was that Marcus had recently finished a large painting for a new client that our landlord Harold had introduced him to. I didn't ask questions. I didn't think it was important. It was the most important thing that had ever happened to us. Harold Brenton was the kind of man you'd walk past without noticing, unless you were paying attention. 67 years old, silver-haired, quiet. He wore the same corduroy jacket most days and drank his coffee black from a chipped mug that said Chelsea, NYC on the side. He owned the old Victorian on Elm Street in New Haven, where Marcus and I rented the ground-floor studio. $800 a month for a live workspace with 12-foot ceilings and north-facing windows, absurdly cheap, even by New Haven standards. When I asked Harold why the rent was so low, he shrugged and said, "I'd rather have artists in the building than accountants. No offense to accountants." To me, Harold was simply our landlord, a kind retired art guy who let us pay late once without charging a fee and who brought us tomatoes from his garden in August. But Harold had a habit of wandering downstairs to watch Marcus work. He'd stand by the easel, coffee in hand, and say things like, "The light on the jawline, push it warmer, just half a degree." Marcus would adjust, and the painting would transform. One afternoon, Harold said something I almost forgot. He told Marcus, "Your work reminds me of someone I used to represent who now sells for 6 figures." I smiled politely. I assumed he was being generous. Around the same time, Harold mentioned that a friend wanted to see more of Marcus's work. He asked if Marcus could photograph a few recent pieces and send them over. I figured it was another small gallery, maybe a regional collector. "The world has a funny way of finding real talent, Adeline," Harold said to me one evening when I was washing brushes in the sink. "It just takes longer when you're honest about it." I should have asked more questions, but I was too busy worrying about the wedding. In January, Marcus proposed. No ring at first, just a question asked softly while we were lying on the studio floor, surrounded by half-finished canvases, snow falling outside the window. He'd later carve a ring from reclaimed walnut wood. It was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever given me. I called my parents that weekend to share the news. We'd set the date, June 14th. A small garden ceremony at a venue near Mystic, Connecticut. Nothing extravagant. 42 guests, wildflowers, an arch Marcus was building from salvaged wood. My father's first response was, "June 14th, let me check." Not congratulations. Not, "I'm so happy for you. Let me check." He called back 2 days later. "I'll be there, sweetheart. I'll walk you down the aisle. I promise." I held those words like glass. My mother asked, "That's nice, honey. How much is it costing?" She didn't ask about my dress. She didn't ask about flowers. She didn't ask if I was happy. Colette sent a text. Just one. "Congrats. Let me know if you need help with anything." Then, silence. No follow-up. No phone call. No offer to help plan, taste cakes, or pick a venue. From the sister who styled herself as an event planner, this was conspicuous. Marcus and I did everything ourselves. I designed the invitations by hand, watercolor wildflowers on cream cardstock, each one slightly different. I thought about Colette's wedding 5 years earlier. 300 guests, gold foil invitations, a 12-piece band. But I loved our invitations. They were ours. I should have known something was wrong when Colette didn't argue about the date. She always has an opinion about everything. This time, she said nothing. And silence, from my sister, is never a good sign. 3 weeks before the wedding, I got a phone call from my Aunt Patricia, my mother's older sister, the family's designated gossip. And she said something that knocked the breath out of me. "Honey, are you going to Colette's shower too, or just the wedding? They're the same day, right?" I stood in the kitchen holding a paintbrush, turquoise dripping onto the floor. "What shower?" "The baby shower. June 14th, at the club in Greenwich. Didn't you get the invitation?" I had not gotten the invitation. I called Colette. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice bright and rehearsed. "Oh my God, Addie, I didn't realize. The venue Brett booked only had June 14th available. It's a whole thing with the caterer and the rental company. I can't move it now. But your wedding is in the afternoon, right? Maybe people can do both? My wedding was at 3 p.m. in Mystic. Colette's baby shower was at noon in Greenwich, an hour and a half away, minimum. No one could do both. She knew that. I knew that. The laws of geography knew that. The baby shower would be held at the Greenwich Country Club, valet parking, catered by a French restaurant in Stamford, monogrammed gift bags at every seat. Colette had told me the details as though she were describing someone else's event. As though it were unavoidable. An act of God. But here's the thing that settled in my stomach like a stone. When I checked with Aunt Patricia, she confirmed that Colette had sent the baby shower invitations 2 weeks before I mailed my save the dates. 2 weeks before. She'd known my wedding date for months. She chose it anyway. Addie, I'm so sorry, Colette said, her voice sweet as arsenic. But this is my first baby. You understand, right? You can have a wedding anytime. I called my mother first. Mom, you know my wedding is that day. A pause. The kind of pause that already contains the answer. I know, honey. But Colette really needs the family there. It's her first grandchild for your father and me. Can't you, maybe postpone a few weeks? I've already paid deposits, Mom. Non-refundable. We've sent invitations. Well, maybe not everyone needs to be at both. I'm sure some people will come to yours. Some people, to my wedding. Like it was an open mic night that might attract a few stragglers. I called my father next. He did what Richard Farrow always does when confronted with a problem. He deflected. Let me talk to your mother. We'll figure it out. He didn't call back for 3 days. I texted him. Dad, are you still walking me down the aisle? He read it. I saw the blue check mark. No reply. I called again, and again. On the 3rd attempt, he finally answered. Of course, sweetheart, I said I would. But the way he said it, the hollowness in his voice, the way the words came out like something he was reading off a cue card, I felt the ground shift beneath me. That week, I counted the RSVPs. Out of 38 family members invited, 22 had already responded with a no. Each of them, coincidentally, was going to Greenwich. I didn't beg. I want you to know that. I asked once. I asked clearly. And I told myself, their answer, the real one, the one spoken through silence and logistics, and maybe not everyone needs to be there, would tell me everything I needed to know about where I stood. It told me everything. Rachel, my best friend, an ER nurse who takes no one's nonsense and has known me since college, was the one who showed me the full picture. Rachel had been added to the Farrow family group chat years ago, back when my mother thought it was nice to include Adeline's friends. Nobody ever removed her. And because Rachel is Rachel, she screenshotted everything. She sat me down in the studio one evening and laid it out. Colette had called every single family member individually. Not a group text, not a casual mention. Individual, surgical phone calls designed to pull each person to her side. To my mother, Colette said, Mom, if you go to Adeline's wedding instead, I'll feel like you don't care about your first grandchild. To Aunt Patricia, Brett's mother is coming. If our side of the family doesn't show up, it'll be embarrassing. To my father, and this one Rachel had as a screenshot from the group chat, Colette wrote, Dad, Adeline will understand. She's used to being disappointed. She's used to being disappointed. My own sister. Typed that with her thumbs and pressed send. But the deepest cut was the financial one. Brett paid my parents' mortgage, $3,200 a month. He'd given my mother a credit card that covered groceries, clothing, salon visits. The Farrow family wasn't just emotionally dependent on Colette. They were financially leashed. Colette never said it directly, of course. She didn't need to. The implication lived in every gesture. If you cross me, the money stops. And my parents, who had built their retirement around Brett's generosity, couldn't afford to call the bluff. In the group chat, Rachel showed me one last message from Colette. Honestly, Adeline's wedding is so small it's barely an event. She's marrying a painter in a garden. It's not like there's a reception at the Ritz. I read it twice. Then I closed the phone. The night before I sent the final reminder to my family, Marcus and I sat together in the studio. The overhead lamp cast warm yellow light across half-finished canvases and jars of turpentine. Outside, the cicadas were starting up. Summer in New Haven sounds like a low hum that never stops. Marcus was cleaning brushes. He didn't look up when he spoke. "We don't need them to make this real, Adeline." A pause. "But I know you want your dad there." I didn't answer right away. I was staring at the canvas he'd been working on. A lone chair in an empty room, light pouring through a window. It wasn't meant to be about me, but it was. That night, I composed one final message. A group text to every family member who'd been invited. No guilt trips, no desperation. Just the facts. Date, time, address, directions. And at the end, one line. "I hope to see you there." I pressed send at 10:47 p.m. Not a single person replied. The next morning, Rachel called from Chicago. She'd already booked a flight. "I'll be there," she said. "I'll always be there." She didn't ask about the others. She already knew. June 14th was 12 days away. I had a dress hanging in the closet, vintage lace, found at a consignment shop in Mystic, altered to fit by a seamstress who charged me $80 and told me I looked like Grace Kelly. I had flowers ordered from a local farm. I had 42 chairs set up in a garden. What I didn't have was a single family member who chose me. But I'll tell you what I also didn't have. I didn't have the urge to beg anymore. And that, I think, was the first time I felt something shift. June 14th, 7 a.m. The morning of my wedding, Rachel was sitting cross-legged on the bathroom counter doing my makeup. Hospital-grade precision, she called it, and I was trying to breathe normally. My dress hung on the closet door. My bouquet, white peonies and lavender from a farm stand in Stonington, sat in a mason jar on the kitchen table. My phone buzzed. "Dad." I picked up. Rachel watched my face. "Adeline, honey." His voice sounded like it had been sanded down to nothing. "I don't know how to say this. Your mother and I, Colette's shower starts at noon, and with the drive, I don't think we can make it to Mystic by 3. 8 seconds. I counted them. 8 seconds of silence where the entire architecture of my childhood, every Father's Day card, every "Daddy, look what I drew," every time I chose to believe he loved me equally, collapsed like a house built on sand. "You promised, Dad." "I know, and I'm sorry. But this is Colette's first baby. You'll have other moments." "No." My voice didn't shake. "I'm proud of that." "This is my only wedding day, Dad. There won't be another one. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I hung up. I set the phone face down on the counter. My hands were trembling, but my eyes were dry. Rachel said nothing. She just picked up the mascara wand and kept going. Later that morning, Rachel checked Instagram. She held the phone up for me to see. Colette had already posted a story. Pink balloons, gold streamers, a venue being set up. The caption read, "So grateful to have the whole family here." Posted at 9 a.m., 3 hours before the shower even started. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just thought, so this is what it feels like when the last thread snaps. The garden venue in Mystic sat behind a small inn, overlooking a salt marsh where the water turned silver in the afternoon light. Marcus had spent 2 weekends building the arch, salvaged oak, sanded smooth, entwined with fresh eucalyptus and white ribbon. It was simple. It was perfect. I arrived at 2:15. The chairs were already set up, 42 of them, white linen, each one with a sprig of lavender tied to the back. From a distance, they looked beautiful, like a painting of a wedding. Up close, 35 of them were empty. 7 people. That's who came. Marcus, Rachel. 2 friends of Marcus from art school, a sculptor named Dave and a printmaker named Lena. Harold Brenton, in a suit I'd never seen him wear. And 2 of my college friends who'd driven up from New York. 7 people in 42 chairs. The wind moved through the empty rows and rustled the lavender like it was trying to fill the silence. I stood at the end of the aisle in my thrift store dress, vintage lace, ivory, tea length. The seamstress had been right. It fit like it was made for me. But standing there alone, without a hand to hold, without a father at my side, I felt every single empty seat like a bruise. The string quartet, just two girls from the local college, violin and cello, began to play. Pachelbel's canon. The sound floated out over the marsh. Rachel stepped toward me. "I can walk you down." I shook my head. "No, you're my maid of honor. You belong up there with Marcus." I turned to face the aisle. Marcus was standing at the other end, and even from here, I could see his eyes were red. I was about to take the first step alone. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy, deliberate, steady. "I believe I'm overdressed for a garden party." I turned. Harold Brenton stood 3 feet behind me, wearing a navy three-piece suit, beautifully cut, clearly old, clearly treasured. A pale blue pocket square, and silver cufflinks that caught the light. I'd later noticed the engraving on them. B.G. Brenton Gallery. But in that moment, all I saw was the steadiness in his eyes. "But if you'd let an old man have the honor," he said, and extended his arm. Something broke open in my chest. Not the sharp kind of breaking, the kind where light gets in. I looked at this man, our landlord, our neighbor, the quiet figure who drank black coffee in our studio and told Marcus to push the light warmer by 1/2 degree, and I understood something I hadn't before. Harold wasn't just kind. He had been watching. He had been paying attention. He had shown up. "Harold, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to." His voice was calm, firm. "Your father should be here, but since he isn't, someone who actually values you should." I took his arm. We walked. The 7 people in those chairs stood up. Rachel already crying, Dave and Lena smiling, Marcus at the end of the aisle, pressing the back of his hand to his mouth. The ceremony lasted 12 minutes. Our officiant, a retired judge Marcus knew through a community art project, kept it short. We said our vows. Marcus had written his on a piece of canvas primed in gesso. I'd written mine on the back of one of my illustrations. We both cried. We both laughed. 7 people clapped. And in that garden, on that June afternoon, it was enough. It was more than enough. I'm going to pause here for a second. If Harold stepping in made your chest tighten the way mine did that day, you already know why this story matters. My father had 30 years to show up for me. Harold had known me for 2. But he was there. If you've ever had someone unexpected fill a space that family left empty, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to see what happens next, because trust me, the story doesn't end at the altar, stay with me. After the ceremony, we held the reception in the same garden. There was no ballroom, no DJ, no 5-tier cake. We ordered pizza from a place in downtown Mystic. Rachel had brought 3 bottles of wine. Nothing fancy, just something she loved. Dave connected his phone to a portable speaker, and we danced on the grass until the fireflies came out. It was joyful. It was imperfect. It was ours. But when the music faded and Marcus was helping Dave fold up tables, I sat down on one of the empty chairs and opened my phone. 0 messages from my family. Not a single one. No congratulations. No sorry we couldn't make it. No thinking of you today. Nothing. As though the event hadn't happened. As though I hadn't happened. I opened Instagram. I knew I shouldn't. But I did. Colette had posted 14 photos, the Greenwich Country Club, pink and gold balloons, a dessert table that probably cost more than my entire wedding, Aunt Patricia laughing with a glass of champagne, Uncle Tom holding a gift bag, and my father, standing beside Colette, his hand resting on her belly, grinning. The last photo was a selfie. Colette in the center, glowing, surrounded by faces I'd invited to my wedding. The caption read, "Surrounded by love. Family is everything." Family is everything. She typed that while I was saying my vows to 7 people and a row of empty chairs. I zoomed in on one of the background images, a group shot near the bar. Brett was in the far corner, turned away from the camera, phone pressed to his ear, jaw tight. He looked stressed. It struck me as odd at a celebration, but I filed it away and didn't think about it again. Not then. That night, back in the studio, Marcus and I lay on the old futon that doubled as our couch. The windows were open, and the sound of crickets poured in like music. We'd taken the lavender from the chairs and put it in jars all over the apartment. It smelled like the wedding had followed us home. Marcus stared at the ceiling. His hand was in mine. "I married the most talented, most stubborn, most beautiful woman I've ever known," he said. "In a garden, with 7 witnesses." He turned to face me. "And I wouldn't trade it for a ballroom with 300. I tried to smile. I almost made it. I keep thinking, maybe if I'd tried harder. Called one more time. You called enough." His voice was gentle but final, like a door closing on a room I didn't need to enter. "You called more than enough, Adeline." It hit me then. Not the sadness for myself, but the sadness for him. Marcus had stood at the end of that aisle, watching his bride walk toward him with a 67-year-old landlord because her own father couldn't be bothered. He deserved a family cheering for us. He deserved better than empty chairs. "You deserved a real wedding," I whispered, "with a family cheering for us." "This was a real wedding," Marcus said. "Harold was there. Rachel was there. That's more family than blood gave you today." I cried then, quietly, into his shoulder. Not because I was broken, but because I was tired of holding it all upright. I didn't know it then, but Marcus had a secret. Something Harold had helped him with over the past several months. Something he'd deliberately kept from me so our wedding day wouldn't be about money. Something that would change everything within weeks. A week passed, then another. Not a single member of my family reached out. On day 8, I sent one final message. I typed it carefully, read it 3 times, and pressed send. "Thank you for your silence. It told me everything your words never could. I won't be reaching out again. If you want to talk, you know where to find me." My mother replied 2 days later. "Adeline, don't be dramatic. We love you. Colette's shower was just bad timing." No apology, no acknowledgement, just the word dramatic, the Farrow family's favorite weapon against anyone who dares feel things out loud. I didn't respond. I muted the group chat, and I turned my attention to the only thing that had never let me down: the work. Marcus was painting again. Something new, something I hadn't seen from him before. He'd started a series he called The 7th Chair. Large format oils exploring absence in intimate spaces. A dinner table set for 8 with one chair slightly pulled back, untouched. A church pew, empty except for a folded program at one end. A row of white linen chairs in a garden, lavender on each one, 35 of them holding nothing but air. I knew what the paintings were about. He didn't need to explain. One afternoon, Harold came downstairs to see the work. He stood in front of the garden piece for a long time, his coffee going cold in his hand. Then he pulled out his phone and typed something. He didn't say who he was texting. I didn't ask. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come, and I started building a life that didn't need one. But the truth was, without my knowing, something enormous was already being built, and it had Harold's fingerprints all over it. 2 weeks after the wedding, Harold invited Marcus and me upstairs for coffee, not the usual "stop by if you want," an actual invitation. He'd set out 3 mugs, a French press, and a cardboard box on the kitchen table. "Sit down," he said. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago." He opened the box. Inside were catalogs, exhibition catalogs from Brenton Gallery, Chelsea, New York City. There were articles clipped from Art News and Art Forum, photographs of Harold standing beside artists at openings, people I recognized from museum walls. I ran Brenton Gallery for 22 years, Harold said, setting a catalog in front of me. The cover showed a painting I'd seen reproduced in textbooks. I represented 43 artists during that time. 7 of them are now in the Whitney Permanent Collection. I stared at him. The quiet man in the corduroy jacket, the landlord who charged us $800 a month and told us to push the light warmer. You never told us, I said. You never needed to know. Harold folded his hands. I wanted to be sure about Marcus first. I've spent my whole career learning the difference between competent and extraordinary. Marcus is extraordinary. Then he told us the rest. 6 months earlier, before the engagement, before the wedding, before any of it, Harold had sent photographs of Marcus's work to Victor Ashland. Victor Ashland, the private collector whose holdings included works by Richter and Hockney, whose name appeared in every major auction catalog in the Western world. Victor had purchased one piece immediately, $85,000. I looked at Marcus. He nodded slowly, and I saw it, the thing he'd been carrying. I was going to tell you after the wedding, he said. I didn't want it to overshadow our day. Over the next several days, the full scope of what Harold had set in motion became clear. Victor Ashland's attorney contacted Marcus with a formal proposal, an art commission agreement for 12 original paintings to be completed over the following 18 months for Victor's private collection. Total contract value, $450,000, payable in installments tied to delivery milestones. Every term was laid out: payment schedule, intellectual property provisions, insurance during transit. It was the kind of contract that artists spend entire careers dreaming about and never see. Attached to the agreement was a separate letter from the director of Caldwell Gallery on West 25th Street in Manhattan, one of the most respected galleries in the country for contemporary realism. They were inviting Marcus to hold a solo exhibition. The centerpiece would be the 7th Chair series. Marcus and I drove to New York to sign the papers at the attorney's office on Park Avenue. I sat in a leather chair and read every page. The numbers blurred. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. This is more money than my father earned in 5 years at the bank, I said quietly. Harold, who had come along for the signing, placed his hand on the table. And it's just the beginning. Victor doesn't invest in artists lightly. He's building a relationship, not buying a product. This will open every door Marcus walks toward. Marcus signed. The attorney notarized. The Caldwell Gallery director confirmed the exhibition timeline via email that same afternoon. It was real. All of it. Documented, legitimate, binding. We hadn't told anyone. Not a soul. My family still thought Marcus was a man who painted for fun and couldn't pay rent without my freelance income. They had no idea what was about to change. A week later, Victor Ashland called Marcus directly. I was in the studio when Marcus put it on speaker. Not intentionally, but because his hands were covered in cadmium yellow. Victor's voice was warm, unhurried, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who hasn't been in a rush since 1997. Marcus, I understand you and your wife didn't get the wedding trip you deserved. My yacht, the Meridian, is in Monaco next month. I'd like you both to spend 10 days on board. Consider it a thank you for the first 3 paintings. The Meridian. I'd learn later that it was a 180-foot motor yacht that Victor kept in the Mediterranean through the summer. He used it to host artists, curators, and collectors. It was as much a floating salon as it was a boat. Marcus, we can't accept that, I whispered, covering the phone. He looked at me, then at the canvas, then back. Harold says Victor does this for every artist he commissions. It's how he builds relationships. It's professional, not charity. I hesitated, but then I thought of the 42 chairs, the empty garden, the father who chose a baby shower over my wedding, and I thought, I have spent my entire life making myself smaller so other people don't feel uncomfortable. Not anymore. I said yes. Rachel found out a few days later, and her reaction was exactly what you'd expect. Girl, you are going on a billionaire's yacht for your honeymoon, And your family thinks Marcus is broke? She laughed so hard she choked on her coffee. They don't know, I said. And I'm not going to tell them. I wasn't hiding anything. I just stopped performing for an audience that never clapped. While Marcus and I were preparing for the trip, something was shifting in the Farrow family, though I only caught it in fragments. Aunt Patricia, the only relative who still texted me occasionally, mentioned in passing that Brett Whitfield's real estate company had hit a rough patch. 2 major development projects had fallen through. Financing had collapsed. The details were vague, but the consequences were not. Colette's Lexus was gone, replaced by a used Honda CR-V. Colette, who posted on Instagram the way some people breathe, had been silent for 2 straight weeks. For her, that was the equivalent of a distress signal. Then, for the first time in over a month, my mother called. "Hi, honey, how are you?" Her voice had that particular brightness, the kind that's trying too hard. "Listen, do you and Marcus want to come to dinner this Sunday? Your father grilled last weekend and it was lovely. We'd love to see you." I leaned against the studio wall. "I'm busy, Mom." "Oh, okay." A pause. "Well, your father says hi." I hung up and stood there for a minute, phone warm in my hand, feeling the familiar weight of it. I knew exactly why she'd called. When Brett's money was flowing, I didn't exist. Now that it was drying up, the Farrow family was suddenly rediscovering their younger daughter. What none of them knew, what I didn't fully understand yet myself, was that 3 weeks later, a single photograph would make Brett Whitfield's money look like pocket change. I packed a suitcase. Marcus packed his sketchbooks. We flew to Nice on a Tuesday morning in July, and when we boarded the Meridian, I looked out at the Mediterranean and thought, this is what it feels like when the world finally catches up to you. The Meridian was not a boat. It was a floating cathedral. Our cabin had a private balcony that opened onto water so blue it looked artificial. The bathroom had marble floors, the sheets were Egyptian cotton, and someone had placed fresh gardenias on the nightstand before we arrived. I stood on the balcony the first morning, barefoot, wearing a linen dress I'd bought at a market in Nice for €40, and I watched the coastline of Monaco drift by like a painting Marcus hadn't gotten to yet. On the 3rd evening, Victor hosted a dinner on the upper deck. 8 guests, 2 collectors from London, a curator from the Tate, a Berlin-based art critic, and their respective partners. The table was set with crystal and white linen. Candles flickered inside hurricane glass. The sky turned from orange to indigo while we ate. Victor stood and raised his glass. "I'd like to introduce Marcus Delaney, the most exciting realist painter I've encountered in 2 decades. His upcoming exhibition at Caldwell Gallery will be called The Seventh Chair. I think you'll find his work extraordinary." Marcus, seated beside me, described the concept: paintings about absence, about the empty spaces left behind by people who chose not to show up. He spoke quietly, without performance. The art critic from Berlin leaned forward. "This has Biennale potential," he said, and the table murmured in agreement. I sat next to my husband, silent, my hand resting on his knee. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who recognized the value of what Marcus and I had built, not despite its quiet origin, but because of it. Before dessert, Victor found me alone by the railing. "Your husband is gifted," he said. "But I think you already knew that, long before anyone else did." "I did," I said. "Thank you for seeing it too." On the last evening aboard the Meridian, I did something I almost never do. I posted a photo on Instagram. I'm not a social media person. My account had maybe 200 followers, friends, a few illustration clients, some college acquaintances. I hadn't posted in months. But that evening, as the sun dropped below the Mediterranean and the light turned the water to gold, Marcus wrapped his arms around me from behind, and Rachel, who'd been texting me relentlessly for photos, wasn't the only reason I pulled out my phone. I wanted a record, not for anyone else, for me. The photo, Me standing at the bow of the Meridian, wearing a white silk dress I'd found in a boutique in Nice. Marcus behind me, his chin resting on my shoulder. The Monaco coastline in the soft distance. On the table beside us, a glass of champagne and, half visible, the Caldwell Gallery exhibition catalog with Marcus's name on the cover. I wrote the caption in under 10 seconds. Honeymoon with my husband, grateful for the people who showed up. No tag, no explanation, no drama, just a sentence and a photograph. I posted it at 9 p.m. European time, 3 a.m. on the East Coast. Then I put my phone in the nightstand drawer, kissed Marcus goodnight, and went to sleep listening to the water move against the hull. When I woke the next morning, I reached for my phone out of habit. The screen was a wall of notifications. I had to scroll for nearly a full minute to see the bottom. 417 missed calls and text messages. The same family that couldn't send one text on my wedding day suddenly had a lot to say about where I'd spent my honeymoon. 417. That's not a typo. I'll let that number sink in for a second. The same family that couldn't send one text on my wedding day suddenly had a lot to say when they saw where I was. If you're still watching, first of all, thank you. And second, what would you have done? Would you have answered those calls, or would you have let them ring? Tell me in the comments. Now, let me tell you what those messages actually said. I sat on the edge of the bed and scrolled through the messages the way you'd read an autopsy report, clinically, slowly, letting each one land. My father. 23 missed calls, 11 text messages. The first, Adeline, whose yacht is that? Then, call me back. Then, I didn't know Marcus was doing this well. Why didn't you tell us? And finally, at 2 a.m. his time, honey, please call your dad. My mother. 18 calls, 9 texts. Oh my God, Adeline. Followed by, is that Monaco? Followed by, are you okay? Whose boat is that? And inevitably, I'm so happy for you, sweetheart. We need to celebrate when you're back. Celebrate. She wanted to celebrate. The woman who couldn't be bothered to text congratulations on my wedding day now wanted to throw a party because she saw a yacht. Colette. 7 calls, restrained by her standards. 3 messages, each more revealing than the last. Wait, what? Then, is Marcus's art actually selling? And finally, Adeline, we should talk. Call me. The rest, aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins, people I hadn't heard from in years, poured in like a flood. OMG, congratulations. So proud of you. We always knew Marcus was talented. The same people who'd RSVP'd no to my wedding were now lining up to claim they'd believed in us all along. And then, at the very bottom, a message I hadn't expected. Brett Whitfield. He'd never texted me directly before in his life. Adeline, is your husband represented by a gallery? I'd love to connect. Brett Whitfield, the man whose money had bought my family's loyalty, was now trying to network through the sister-in-law he'd barely acknowledged for 5 years. I read every message. I did not respond to a single one. Marcus found me on the balcony an hour later, phone face down on the table. He didn't ask what the messages said. He could read it on my face. I'm not going to ignore them forever, I said. But I'm not going to pretend this is okay either. That afternoon, I unlocked the family group chat for the first time since I'd muted it. I typed one message, I revised it twice, then I sent it. Thank you for your messages. Marcus and I are doing well. For those who are curious, Marcus signed a major art commission 6 weeks ago. The yacht belongs to his patron, Victor Ashland. Our honeymoon was a gift. I want to be honest. I won't pretend that your absence on June 14th didn't hurt. It did. Deeply. My father promised to walk me down the aisle and chose not to. My mother chose a baby shower over her daughter's wedding. My sister scheduled her event on my wedding day deliberately. I'm not angry, but I need space. When I'm ready to talk, I'll reach out. Please respect that. I pressed send, then I put the phone in the drawer again. For 4 hours, Nobody replied. I imagine they were reading it in clusters, gathered around someone's kitchen counter, passing the phone, rereading it, looking at each other in the particular silence of people who've been caught. My father called at 8 p.m. I didn't answer. An hour later, Colette posted an Instagram story, a photo of a beautifully set dinner table, warm lighting, wine glasses. The caption, "Family dinner tonight, missing one." Missing one. As though I had simply failed to attend. As though I were the one who'd left. Some people never stop rewriting the story, even when the whole room already knows the truth. 3 weeks after we returned from Monaco, Caldwell Gallery issued the press release. Marcus Delaney, the 7th Chair, Solo Exhibition. It went out to every major art publication in the country. Art News ran a preview. ArtNet picked it up the same day. And then the one that mattered most. A feature in the New York Times Arts section, with a photograph of Marcus standing beside the centerpiece of the show. The painting, a garden rendered in luminous afternoon light, an arch of salvaged wood threaded with eucalyptus, 42 white chairs with lavender on each, stretching in neat rows across a green lawn. 7 of them held figures, warm, alive, painted with the tenderness Marcus reserves for people he loves. The other 35 were empty. Sunlight fell across the vacant seats like a question nobody wanted to answer. The title, June 14th. Price, $120,000. Already sold. Victor had claimed it before the exhibition opened. The article noted that Marcus's work explores familial absence and emotional displacement with a specificity that feels both deeply personal and universally devastating. It mentioned Victor Ashland's private collection. It mentioned Brenton Gallery's legacy. It used the word extraordinary. On opening night, 200 people filled the gallery, collectors, curators, critics. Adeline stood beside Marcus in a simple black dress, watching strangers cry in front of paintings that were born from the worst day of her life. A reporter from the Times approached Marcus. The title, June 14th. Is it autobiographical? Marcus didn't hesitate. Yes, it was my wedding day. 7 guests, 42 chairs. The room went quiet. Then the questions began. By morning, the story was everywhere. I hadn't planned it. Marcus hadn't planned it. But the truth, once it finds a stage, doesn't need permission. My father saw the article first. Someone forwarded it. I never found out who. But I can imagine him sitting at the kitchen table in Glastonbury, reading glasses on, the New York Times open on his iPad, and seeing those 42 chairs rendered in oil paint with the precision of a man who remembers every detail of the day his father-in-law didn't show up. My mother called. Her voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard before. Adeline, your father saw the painting. He hasn't spoken in hours. He just sits there. Mom, I didn't paint it, I said. Marcus did. He painted what happened. She didn't have a response for that. Colette's reaction was different. She wasn't sad. She was furious, not at herself, but at the exposure. Within days, her friends began asking questions. Wait, your sister's husband, is that Marcus Delaney? Why weren't you at her wedding? Colette, who had spent years curating a narrative of family unity and social grace, suddenly couldn't explain the gap. The image she'd constructed, loving sister, devoted daughter, center of the Pharaoh universe, had a 42-chair-sized hole in it. Brett called Marcus directly. Hey Marcus, congratulations. Listen, I have some clients who might be interested in commissioning. Marcus cut him off politely. Thanks, Brett. But I work exclusively through my gallery now. Harold and Caldwell handle all my commissions. Meanwhile, Aunt Patricia sent me a screenshot from the family group chat, the one I was no longer in. Colette had written, "She's doing this to humiliate us." And my father, for the first time in his life, had replied, "Maybe we should have gone to the wedding." My mother's response, "Don't start, Richard." Even now, even with the truth on a gallery wall for 200 people to see, nobody in my family could say the simple words, "We were wrong." 2 months after the exhibition opened, A notice appeared in the Connecticut Business Registry that would have been unremarkable to most people. Whitfield Properties, LLC, Brett's family company, had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The details emerged slowly, then all at once. 2 failed developments in Stamford, a construction loan default, creditors lining up. The company that had once made Brett the golden son-in-law of the Farrow family was now a name on a court filing. The consequences hit my parents within weeks. Brett stopped paying the mortgage on the Glastonbury house, $3,200 a month, gone overnight. My mother's supplementary credit card was canceled. Colette, who had never needed to think about money, began selling her jewelry through a luxury consignment site. The Cartier bracelet, a Tiffany pendant, pieces she'd once displayed like trophies. My father called me, the first time since the article. Adeline, I don't know how to say this. His voice was thin, tired. Your mother and we might lose the house. I know I have no right to ask, but is there any way? I let the silence sit. I think he needed to hear it. The same silence I heard on my wedding morning when he told me he wasn't coming. Dad, I said, I'm going to be honest with you. 6 months ago, you chose Colette's party over my wedding. You broke a promise. You let me walk down the aisle with our landlord because showing up for me wasn't worth the drive. I heard him breathing. I'm not going to say no to helping. But I need you to understand something first. I'm not your backup plan. I'm your daughter, and you treated me like I was optional. He didn't speak for a long time. Then quietly, you're right. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Colette called 2 days later. It was the first time we'd spoken since before the wedding. She opened with tenderness. I miss you, Addie. The nickname, the voice she used when she wanted something. Then, within 30 seconds, the mask slipped. Brett lost everything. Mom and Dad need help. You and Marcus are doing so well now. Can't we just move past this? Move past what, exactly? I kept my voice even, not cold, just clear. You scheduled your baby shower on my wedding day. You called every family member and told them to choose you. You told Dad that I could have a wedding anytime. Do you remember that? Silence. Then, I was pregnant, Adeline. I was hormonal and scared, and you were calculating. I said it without malice, just fact. And that's okay. I'm not here to punish you, but I need you to know. I see it clearly now. I've always seen it. I just chose to ignore it because I wanted a family. I could hear her breathing change, the practiced calm faltering. I love you, Colette, but I will never again let love be used as a leash. If you want a relationship with me, it starts with honesty, not with asking for money. She hung up. She didn't call back for 3 weeks. I set the phone down and walked to the studio, where Marcus was finishing the 9th painting in the series, a long table with 11 place settings, 1 chair pulled back, a napkin folded but untouched. He looked up when I came in. How'd it go? She hung up. He nodded. She'll call back. Maybe, but she'll call back different, or she won't call back at all. Those are the only 2 options I'm accepting. Marcus went back to painting. I picked up my illustration pen. The crickets sang outside, indifferent to all of it. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of a house I owned. It was small, a 2-bedroom cottage in Westport, Connecticut, 10 minutes from the water. White clapboard, blue shutters, a porch that wrapped around the side. The ground floor had been converted into Marcus's studio. Proper ventilation, north-facing light, a door that opened onto a garden where, in the spring, I planned to grow lavender. We'd paid for it in full. No mortgage, no help, no one's name on the deed but ours. Marcus had completed the 7th chair series, 12 paintings that had hung in Caldwell Gallery for 3 months. Nearly every piece sold. Total revenue exceeded $600,000, and the waiting list for his next series was already growing. Victor Ashland had offered a second commission. 2 European galleries had reached out. My own career had shifted too. A major children's book publisher had offered me a multi-book illustration contract after seeing my work at the Caldwell opening. Someone from their art department had attended and recognized my editorial style. The first book was about a little girl who plants a garden of wildflowers in a field where nothing was supposed to grow. I was illustrating it at the dining room table every morning while Marcus worked downstairs. Harold came for dinner every Sunday. He'd drive over from New Haven in his old Volvo, bring a bottle of wine, nothing expensive, always good, and sit at our table like he'd always been there. Because in every way that mattered, he had. One Sunday, I served roast chicken with herbs from the garden. Harold raised his glass. "To the seventh chair," he said. Marcus clinked his glass against Harold's. I clinked mine against both. 7 people at a wedding. And every single one of them still in my life. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, I heard a car pull into the gravel driveway. No one had called ahead. I opened the front door and found my father standing on the porch. He was wearing a flannel shirt and khakis. His hands were in his pockets. He looked older than I remembered, not in the way of time passing, but in the way of a man who'd been carrying something heavy and couldn't set it down. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he said. I waited. "I came to tell you that I'm sorry. Not the kind of sorry that expects forgiveness, the kind that knows it doesn't deserve it." He stood there in the October light, leaves drifting across the porch, and I could see he'd rehearsed this, not because it wasn't genuine, but because it was. He needed to say it precisely. "I sat in a country club eating finger sandwiches while my daughter got married with 7 people, he said. "I will carry that for the rest of my life." "I know, Dad." My voice was steady, quiet. "You can stay for coffee. Marcus just made a pot." He came inside. He walked slowly through the house, looking at everything. The studio downstairs, the garden visible through the back window, Marcus's paintings on the walls. In the hallway, he stopped. A small painting hung near the coat hooks. June 14th, study number 1. An early sketch in oil. 7 chairs occupied, 35 empty. My father stood in front of it for a long time. Then he reached into the bag he was carrying and pulled out a frame. Inside, a certificate. The Connecticut Statewide Art Award, dated 12 years ago. My name on it. The paper had yellowed. "I found it in the attic," he said. "It should have been on the wall 16 years ago." I took it from him, and I let him stay for coffee. People always ask me, "Did you forgive them?" The honest answer is that forgiveness isn't a single event. It's not a gift you hand over and then it's done. It's a bridge you build one plank at a time, and some days you're laying planks, and some days you're standing at the edge wondering if it's worth crossing. Colette eventually wrote me a letter. A real one, pen on paper, mailed with a stamp. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it contained the one sentence I'd been waiting years to hear. "I scheduled the shower on your day. It wasn't an accident. I was afraid that if your wedding went well, everyone would stop needing me." I read that line 4 times. Then I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer. Not in the trash, not on the wall. In the drawer, where I could find it when I was ready. My mother calls once a week now. She asks about my work, about Marcus's paintings, about the garden. She doesn't ask for money. It's a small thing, but it's a true one. Brett and Colette live in a rented apartment in Stamford. Brett took a position at another firm, starting over. Colette got a job, her first in 6 years, as an events coordinator for a nonprofit. I heard she's good at it. I hope she is. And me? I'm standing on the back porch of a house I paid for myself, watching the evening light settle over the garden. Marcus is in the studio. I can hear the soft scrape of his palette knife through the open window. Harold is on his way for Sunday dinner. The lavender I planted in the spring has started to bloom. 42 chairs, 7 people. 417 messages. In the end, the numbers don't matter. What matters is that I stopped counting the people who left and started counting the ones who stayed. Self-respect is the quietest form of revenge. You don't have to burn anything down. You just have to stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been the one sitting in the empty chairs while someone else got the full room, I see you. You're not invisible. You never were. Now, I have a question. Would you have answered those 417 calls? Or would you have kept the phone in the drawer? Drop your answer in the comments. I promise I'll be reading. If you want to hear another story like this one, there's one waiting for you in the description below. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe. Not for me. For the next story that might find you exactly when you need it.